Alright, with Ceridra's V4 beta update changing literally nothing about her, not even wording changes, and with Phainon and Sunday's banner on the cusp of ending, I needed to get this final pulling advice video out there before it was too late. Apologies for the less edited video. So, final conclusion. How should you spend your jades during the last few hours of Phainon and Sunday's banner? Phainon Eidolons, Sunday, or save for Seridra? Between Phainon and Sunday investment, you can watch this video linked in the description below, but basically, this chart was the conclusion as to how to spend your jades between Phainon and Sunday. Phainon's E2 is the biggest damage increase for Phainon, but it's also the most expensive, as it requires 2 extra 5-star pulls. But you know what else requires 2 extra 5-star pulls? Ceridra's E1. Getting Ceridra's E1 will cost the same amount as going from Phainon E0 to Phainon E2. If you already have Phainon E1, then just go for his E2. However, if you're at Phainon E0 and you have a total of 2 5-star pulls you can spend, then it becomes a question of Phainon E2 versus 2 copies of Seridra to get her E1. Seridra's E1 is very strong for Phainon teams. Stronger than you might think. Not only are you getting the double meteors that Seridra provides by spending your cost on her E0, but her E1's damage increase is very substantial, especially if you already have Phainon's signature late cone to stack the defense thread. However, the real value of Seridra's E1 actually has nothing to do with her own personal damage buff. Seridra's E1 is so strong because of the extra core flame stacks it provides. Thanks to this, Seridra's E1 allows Phainon to more easily slot in stronger buffers in his final teammate slot. For those who aren't aware, characters like Tribi, Cypher, and Ruan Mei E1 are the strongest buffers for Phainon's damage. However, they have the lowest amount of stack generation for his ultimate, which makes it difficult to slot them into his teams. Seridra's E1 helps this issue by a lot, and therefore, that's where a lot of the value of Seridra's E1 lies. However, she's also somewhat reliant on Sunday being on the team to further help the stack generation issue. With Sunday plus Seridra's E1, you're now basically free to use whichever character you want in the last slot to focus completely on Phainon's buffing, and therefore, the choice is more like, do you go for a team of Phainon E2 plus Branya, or do you go for a team of Phainon E0 plus Tribi/Cypher, since Seridra's E1 allows you to easily slot in Tribi/Cypher over Branya. First off, if you don't have Sunday, and you don't have Tribi or Cypher or Ruan Mei E1, then don't go for Seridra's E1. It loses value if you aren't able to make use of the fact that it frees up the last teammate slot for one of those buffers. Therefore, Phainon's E2 would still be the strongest increase if you're able to go all the way for it. If you are able to spare a Tribi or Cypher or Ruan Mei E1 for your Phainon team though, and you have Sunday to pair with Seridra's E1, then her E1 becomes a lot more tempting. However, I'll also say that if you're considering doing all this just for Phainon, then it's probably because you really love Phainon specifically. And in that regard, then I would still recommend his E2 above her E1. However, once again, all of this assumes that you're looking to invest enough pulls for 2 extra 5-stars. If you only have enough pulls for 1 extra 5-star, then Seridra is obviously a higher value pull than Phainon's E1. Never go just for Phainon's E1. Sunday is also a more valuable pull than Phainon's E1. Now, what about Sunday versus Seridra? If you've held out this long, then here is the answer that may or may not satisfy you. For Phainon teams specifically, I would value Seridra higher. Her damage increase is better, and her stack generation issue can be managed with other teammates. Overall, she's going to be the biggest increase for your Phainon team's performance as far as the singular support goes. Seridra is the biggest damage increase for Phainon due to the double meteors, and Sunday is the biggest stack generator for Phainon. That is their 2 sides of the spectrum for how they impact Phainon teams. While Sunday's stack generation can be fulfilled by other characters, thus making Seridra more valuable for Phainon, Sunday's value also comes from the fact that he is far more flexible than Seridra. It isn't even close. Sunday is best in slot or competitive as the best in slot for the teams of so many other characters. Way too many to even list here. Therefore, it is very possible that Sunday should be your priority just because of how he can be flexed into other teams when you're up against content that favors other teams, like wind weak enemies for Anaxa or Saber, or imaginary weak enemies for Mighty. So, while this may not be a satisfactory answer, the truth is that it's just very account and situation dependent. For Phainon specifically, Seridra is the biggest damage increase over Sunday, but Sunday has many things going for him that could make him the highest priority pull for your account, while still being one of Phainon's best teammates as well. Obviously, the best Phainon team uses both Seridra and Sunday together. Make your decision wisely based on this information. The light cone situation is rather similar. Phainon's light cone is more important for Phainon teams specifically, whereas Sunday's light cone is valuable because it's flexible to use it on him in multiple different teams. So you just have to pick based on what you value more. The flexibility of Sunday's light cone and how valuable it is in other teams, or investing specifically into Phainon teams and thus choosing Phainon's light cone. As for their light cones versus Seridra, Seridra is technically better for Phainon teams specifically. Yes, Phainon's light cone is very strong, but part of its appeal is how it helps ease speed requirements on the supports for 0-cycle rotations. However, most people aren't going to care about aiming for specific 0 cycles, and therefore, I would still recommend Seridra above Phainon's light cone for Phainon teams specifically. However, I want everyone to be aware of the fact that Seridra is in the second half of patch 3.5, meaning it is very likely we will get enough pulls to reach the 5-star pity at least one time on her banner. There are still lots of jades to be obtained to save up for Seridra's banner. banner. So don't panic too hard, because I know there are a lot of choices to make. Sunday's light cone versus Seridra is basically the same argument as Sunday's light cone versus Phainon's light cone, since you can basically just think of Seridra as an extension of Phainon's kit. Seridra is something that you pull only for Phainon teams, just like Phainon's light cone. Sunday's light cone is something you pull if you value the flexibility of how valuable his light cone is for him on teams besides just Phainon teams. Once again, it is very account dependent, and my hope is that by giving you guys all the information to consider, you'll be able to come to the best possible decision based on your personal account situation. And lastly, Seridra's light cone is never worth it and should never be considered until you reach the point where you literally have nothing else worth investing into for Phainon teams. It's not bad by any means, it's just not a priority above other options. And finally, to end things off, I want to assure you guys that reruns are always a thing, so please do not give into FOMO. You can always choose to invest into whichever choice you missed out on once the rerun banners come around for Phainon or Seridra or Sunday. Chances are likely that when your Phainon team reaches the point where it starts to struggle, that's when his rerun and Seridra's rerun will be right around the corner. So genuinely don't stress too hard about it. No matter what you choose to invest in right now with your current pulls, Phainon is strong enough that you'll be doing fine until the rerun banners come around to help you invest further if you choose to. A lot of Phainon's investment paths and options are very situational and oftentimes not too different from each other depending on the situation. You will be just fine. And lastly, for real this time, just to briefly touch on Seridra, I'll probably have another video coming out discussing her overall value some other time, but just to briefly touch on it here, is Seridra even worth it for Phainon teams? Short answer, yes, but only depending on what you consider valuable. Do you consider a weaker but cheaper version of Fäinon's E2 worth it for Phainon? If yes, then Cerydra is worth it. If not, then that's fine. Seridra should be viewed as a cheaper version of a Phainon Eidolon rather than her own character. If a cheap Phainon Eidolon is worth it to you, then Seridra is worth it. Of course, I completely understand if you despise Seridra's kit because of the fact that she's just an extension of Phainon's kit, and so it's totally fine to not want her because of that as well. It is what it is. So there you have it. Those are all the things you should think about as Phainon and Sunday's banner comes to a close, and we enter the era of discussing just how worth it Seridra is for you. In short, there is no conclusive answer. But hopefully all of the information I gave you in this video is enough for you to come to your own answer for your specific account situation. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer. And be sure to like the video if you found it helpful or enjoyable in any way. Subscribe for more Seridra content, as well as more Phainon content as he gets even more teammate options in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have the best of luck in whatever you decide to do with your pulls. Until next time!